how has AI changed your business, if at all? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So I use ChatGPT way more than I would like.
Okay.
And I find myself using it a lot to like clean up emails or like clean up things that I'm writing. So like it almost, I don't want to say I'm like afraid of it or it's too much, because it really is useful for me, but I'll like craft an email and then I've got kind of a hotkey set up that just says check for simple grammar. And
Is
so
that like Grammarly?
yeah, basically I use it as like a version of Grammarly. So I'll just type in like SG and it'll say check for spelling and grammar, and I'll paste whatever I'm about to send to someone, and it'll just basically, it's not going to change the content. It's just going to clean it. It's going to obviously fix any grammatical mistakes or spelling mistakes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it'll like shift a sentence to make more sense, grammatical sense. And I'm like, it's helpful. And then I throw it in and I know my email's like proofread.
Yeah.
That's the light version of it. I think the heavier version of it is like, you know, like if I have a legal question, it's like I could craft a perfect email and spend pay for 30 minutes of my lawyer's time. Or if this is a question that's like can be answered from the internet, like it's like almost like definitions, then I'll just ask ChatGPT and it'll spit back responses. I'm like, I just saved $250 and like waiting on an answer from an attorney to figure out what a convertible note is, you know? And I can ask questions like, does it make sense in my position? Here's my position to do this. And, you know, so there's obviously limits to it, but I've found it to be pretty helpful.
Is your mind, I find that my mind doesn't even go in that direction. And I know that it's there, and I know ChatGPT is there, Grammarly, but I don't even think about it. And
you don't think about using it?
I don't think about it using it at all. Well, but it's so much in our space now.
Your mind is pure.
I think it's like hollow.
Well, I think it's like muscle memory, right? I mean,
I guess so. Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear you say that before I call my lawyer. And if my lawyer's listening to this, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna try that. But that's a great point. You know, because it's going to scrub case law.
I know, but I'm like,
I mean, there's
so smart.
Yeah,
but I'm not even thinking about it.
I mean, there's some things probably that you would have to call your lawyer and say, hey, look, this is a real particular
for sure
thing, right?
No doubt.
That we need to talk about. But
yeah, absolutely. It's more like for definitions and for I think another way I've seen it used recently is like a buddy sent me his chat with GPT, and it was like, does this make sense from this perspective? Like he was crafting an email to a group of people, and he was like, does this communicate the point I want to be making, which is this? And it responded back. It was like, yeah, your point is clear, but you ought to like change this thing because it's a little hazy. You know, it's like,
yeah. You know, I don't know if it is probably a generational thing, but I don't quite understand when you hear like AI is going to completely and then people are afraid of it, you know. But then every once in a while I'll get a little nugget, like you just mentioning the fact that you use that for like really like legal questions. I'm like, oh yeah. And like, you know, that's pretty impactful. Right.
But my 14-year-old daughter uses it. Like their brains are already trained in terms of how do they use the various forms of AI in their schoolwork or their lives, whatever they're doing. But I think it is in a way generational.
Yeah.
So what is the point where it becomes like dangerous? And I think a lot of ways you could think about dangerous, but I'm mainly asking from like, when is it dangerous from the point of like, you're not really thinking for yourself?
Yeah.
And that's what scares me with the younger generation is like, hey, go write a paper on this. Okay, well, ask ChatGPT to write the paper. It's like, well, the point is that you're learning how to write a paper. You're learning how to think. You're learning how to write.
Yeah.
And so I think I can find myself sometimes going to ChatGPT for stuff that I shouldn't, which is like, I don't want it to have to think for me, you know? And like, and that's where it's scary. If I receive an email from someone and I thought that maybe they sent that to me and it was just like a AI driven thing, I would be so skeptical and I would be pretty upset because like, did you think about what you sent me? You know?
Yeah. I'm guessing though, there's probably a filtering system, an AI filtering system that you can put in what you may believe is an AI statement, or I statement. Yeah. and have that tell you whether or not it is. Like, it's like a back and forth checker game.
Yep.
There was one guy that was talking about they were, and I don't know if it was I think it was the Israeli-Hamas conflict where it asked GPT to give arguments on both sides of the conflict. And that was a really interesting, I read through it. I'm like, oh, wow. Because you don't get that very much.
Yeah. But
it provided a really interesting, argument for both sides. And you're like, oh, wow, that's okay. That's pretty interesting in terms of like knowledge.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a form of doing the work for you, so our brains are less inclined to activate in a natural way, but it's also the falsification of whatever information that you're putting out there.
Yeah.
Right. And knowing if that's somehow falsified in terms of its original intent, or it's just made up for no apparent reason. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It hasn't affected my world yet.
No. And I think we're fortunate that, we learned a lot of fundamentals in terms of learning how to learn, where to find information, how to talk to people ahead of this technology coming in. I think part of the danger is that, kids don't really need to learn that because there's an easy source of finding an answer, which is great. But what happens if that goes away, or what happens if you find yourself without an iPhone or an iPad, that you don't have those, or maybe you don't have those fundamental skills that we learned because we came along a little bit ahead of, you know what I mean?
Well, and furthermore, how do you push the world further if you're only tapping into what the internet knows? You know, AI is only as good as the content that's already existing.
Yeah.
And so,
great point.
I mean, to me, like, this is a little tangential, but we've been making school decisions because our older son, or my oldest kid, Mac, is turning 5, or he just turned 5. He's going to kindergarten next year. And we basically just locked into a long-term school, which is kind of a scary thought. It's a school called Regents down on Southwest Parkway. And it's the focus is classical school. There's a classical method. Yeah. And as I learned about the classical method, what I really loved the most about it is that it teaches you how to learn. Mm-hmm. And I can't think of a more important skill than learning how to learn. Yeah. Because that is how you're going to push the world further. If you want to contribute to the world, you need to know how to learn so that you can create out of that learning and like push forward more learnings into the world, But like that's the problem with the internet and ChatGPT as like our source of learning. It's only as good as what's already been created.
Yeah. Makes us a little bit lazy as well.
Yeah.
I would imagine though that in the food industry, AI is not particularly like how I don't know how that would affect the food industry.
I think there's a lot of back-end type stuff that it could help with, like, software as a service, just any software that's related to the restaurant industry, whether it's accounting or POS systems or marketing, like those are all going to get incrementally better with AI, I think. Yeah. And I'll take those gains. Mm-hmm. I think where it can go too far is like, robots serving food. Yeah. And that's the trend right now, Chipotle, Sweetgreen, they're all sort of moving towards, well, we'll just have the robots create it because it portions perfectly and it saves on labor cost and you get a consistent outcome, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, it's like, okay, wait, what's the cost there? Yeah. The cost, not only I can't afford, our business can't afford to create those robots, but the cost of hospitality, I think is a huge one.
Yeah. Yeah. At what point does it stop helping and adding to the experience and start taking away from the experience? Pre-COVID, I went up and met with the guys at Shake Shack that were developing out. We were sharing ideas with Torchy's and their corporate headquarters in New York. The lower level, they had a store and they were trying out kiosks, like no front facing interaction with a cashier. It was all kiosk driven. They were testing that because they thought, well, that was going to make them a lot more efficient and everything. But it was weird. And it's like, I don't know. And maybe for some restaurant concepts it works, like a pizza delivery or something, but like with what you're doing and a lot of other places that we frequent, like I want to see somebody and I want to have that interaction and I want to I love the display kitchens where you can see somebody back in the back chopping up vegetables. You're like, okay, that I like that and that makes me feel better about what I'm getting ready to eat.
If you're a low cost play, you're just creating a transaction. I mean, historical like fast food. I mean, I think that works well.
Sure.
Our approach is trying to be a more life-giving version of fast food, which includes like hospitality elements. So that when people feel life when they're around people, when they can connect with people. And I just think you're taking away that element of being able to offer part of the experience. It's like for us, it's like the food, the space, and the people.
Yeah.
The product, place, and people. And the people is a huge element.
Yeah.
The biggest compliment that I get from my friends is not, hey, I went to Honest Mary's today and the food was great or the space was great. It was like, man, the people at your Rosedale store are just so nice. Like, who's that one guy that always serves at the front? Like, he's so kind. I'm like, that's the best compliment you could give.
Yeah.
And I think subtly, it's the reason people come back.
Sure.
Most of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've got a number of stories of places where we have eaten or where we still go and frequent, and it's a really cool interaction. Obviously, the food has to be,
totally
good, but that's what you remember is that interaction that you have with somebody.
It's a little more subconscious too. Like if you think about the places you go to often, I tend to think like, well, I really like the food and it's close, but I think more at a subconscious level, I do go back because the people, I feel welcomed there in some way. Like it feels like they want me to be there.
Yeah.
And then think about the restaurant that you did go to where the food was phenomenal, but the service was shit.
Yeah.
Probably didn't go back there.
Right.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Absolutely.
How has our new world in terms of staff and overturn and finding that type of service that's hospitality driven, has that affected your business at all, or is the retainage still okay?
Yeah. So post COVID, I think everyone dealt with just the labor shortage. That was horrible. I mean, we would spend thousands of dollars on Indeed posts for 4 scheduled interviews to which no one would show up to any of the interviews. It was just a total black hole of hiring.
Yeah.
That has changed for us. I mean, there are still not always easy to hire the right people, but for the most part, we're finding the people we need. At our Rosedale shop, for example, I think all but like 1 or 2 of the people that work at that store are referrals from current employees.
Yeah, nice.
And so that is clearly the way to go if you can do it. And the way to do that is to take care of your people.
Yeah.
We don't do it perfectly, but you just see the fruit of taking care of people and creating a place where people like to work, because then it's like when their friend needs a job, they just say, hey, I'm pretty sure we're hiring you, come work at our spot.
Yeah. Now, as you scale up, how do you believe that care of staff or that quality of staff? Is there a methodology behind that? Because it gets a lot more difficult.
For sure. I think that might be the main thing that keeps me up at night.
Yeah,
as I think about going to Houston, and hopefully that's our next spot. It's like how do you go and create that culture in a new place? I don't feel like I have any good answers for that. We
talk about that a lot in terms of there are business decisions which are data oriented, and you remove the emotion out of those decisions because you have to move forward, in order to scale up or be successful in a way. But then there's this cultural aspect that you want to maintain, and you're trying to navigate through the individuality of staff and emotion and day to day and the things that we all go through. And it's a difficult little gray area to begin really, investigating and trying to understand what the right decisions are.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I think part of the answer comes back to the people. Like there's no benefit package or comp package or, cool concept or list a bunch of things that are going to create that culture. Ultimately, like culture is when someone is known by someone else and they feel cared for by that person. Like it's that, who's my boss? Who are my coworkers? Who are my people? I can't send some message from my office virtually about how great Honest Mary's is and how we're going to help people if they don't have a relationship with me. And so I think how that works out is like we're going to have market leads and team leads who get the core culture and personality of Honest Mary's and are caring for the people in their store, like directly, that person-to-person contact.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, right? Because at some point, our jobs are pretty heavy. We're small. So we're hands-on day to day in order to try to improve the business, improve the culture, maintain the culture that we believe that is the right one for our fit, for our own business. But at some point that culture takes over. And I was just imagining where we are now versus like a Torchy's, that they did a great job establishing a culture, and then that culture just took over and owned it.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a hands-on business in terms of trying to maintain that. But at some point, because I worked so closely with everyone there, whenever I walked in, like everybody believed in it.
Absolutely.
Right. And I'm just curious, like, what is that threshold of amount of people, or when okay, now I'm going to drop the key, now I'm going to let this thing move forward and so on.
I can speak a little bit for Torchy's, having been there. And it's a lot, we had Mike Ripka on, I don't know, a couple of months ago, 3 months ago. And they really put their money where their mouth was when it came to like taking care of people, and I think it started early on. And they were able to develop, a narrative and a story about where the company came from and why it was important. And they made sure that the people that were there early understood that and bought in. And then as the company grew, they would, they had a lot of different training tools that would, somebody coming in would be taught and they would say, hey, look, this is where this company comes from. This is our values. This is why it's important. And so they would be taught that, but then they'd also feel that from the team leads or the trainers or the district managers or whatever. And then, there was a lot of, when Torchy started going out of market to Houston, to Denver, they would send or try to send local Austin folks that were already drinking the Kool-Aid to go out there and represent and help train or be part of that. Yeah. And I think they did a really good job up until the point where they sold the company.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Because the other part is that the owners really bought into it and the owners were involved. And, even when we had 5,000 some odd employees at some point. But then, as the evolution and story of the company, evolved, there was different owners and then there was different decisions that needed to be made because of different priorities and stuff like that. And I think I can't speak to it now because I'm not there, but I know it's changed, but
remarkable that Torchy's was able to maintain it for that long.
Yeah.
And so what I hear you saying is it's having like that core original story and reason and care for people, I'm sure was built into the original story. It's communicating that story through people, not through video messages.
Yeah.
Right. Like through actual people.
Yeah.
When new stores open, there is that like element of this person has, through a chain of other people, has the story in them and is communicating. Yeah. Is that about right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of stories. So one thing that, Mike talked about was second chances. I think that's what we named the episode. And I mean, I could sit here and tell you a number of stories of people that, there's one guy named Charlie Scott, and I hope he's listening to this at some point, but he was one of the early employees back, even I think when they had people really don't know that there was a location on 6th Street for a brief amount of time. And Charlie was in recovery. And somehow he got introduced to Mike, and Mike hired him to be, somewhere on the cook line. And Charlie had to ride his bike from somewhere in South Austin all the way to 6th Street to get there every morning, like at 5 a.m. to start helping prep. And they just, it grew into a thing where, that opportunity that Mike gave Charlie to change his life. And Charlie's still there today, and he's pretty high up on the totem pole in terms of training, but he's like one of the top guys on the culture team. Mm-hmm. He's one of the guys that talks to people when they come into the system. He's like, hey man, this is what they did for me. And I mean, there's a number of those kind of stories, where they gave somebody an opportunity. They built them up. They invested in them, and they took care of them. it showed. The result of all that was, man. I can only speak to when I was there, but we would have these company outings where they would take us somewhere, and there was a like the second or third night, and they would get everybody together, and they'd say, "Hey, look, what does Torchy's? What does it mean to you? What has it done for you?" And I mean, people would go around the room, and you'd be amazed at the stories of, man, that this is how my life changed by being part of this company, and just all of that.
That question.
It's just like, man, like people would kill for Torchy's back then.
Yeah,
I mean, and so. That's kind of what I took away from it, is really like back to what you just started talking about earlier, was it's about the people.
Yeah.
And I think if you find the right people that align with your values, that's one of the hard parts.
Yeah.
And you get them, and then you invest in them. And sometimes that means tough love, right? And holding people to a standard, but then you back it up with support and all that. I mean, you can, that's how you go far.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I was imagining the that gray that we were talking about, in terms of knowing when those boundaries are crossed, or knowing how to coach up, or knowing how to mentor, and knowing how much, I guess, our time is always spread pretty thin throughout the day. So, like, were there, at what point, maybe you've reached that point too in your own companies, but at what point do you know when to find that mentoring support, or when to find those individuals that can help you maintain that culture, maintain that spirit that you want to keep as that common thread throughout your business? Are y'all finding that as a tough opportunity to spread, as you scale, as you grow?
Yeah, I don't know. We were talking about, leadership really becomes important with the gray areas, right? If it's a black and white situation where you've got a policy or procedure, that's easy to make decisions inside of that. It's true leadership is like where it's a gray area. It's like, there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different opportunities to make a decision. And so then we, sometimes rely on mentors. I don't know, Mark. I mean, I had a situation last night that, I reached out to one of my mentors and said, hey, like, what do you think about this? Because and I got a pretty clear answer back, which is nice. So I don't know. I mean, how do you feel about these areas, whether it's an employee-based decision, or, you're trying to make a decision on a piece of real estate where it's like, man, you have a tough time making a decision. Who do you go to?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been really nice having a partner. So Honest Marriage has been around for 7 years. The first half of that, I really didn't have a partner, but the second half, Andrew Weishart, I brought him on, and he's kind of co-piloting with me. And really, it's like, he's always a sounding board, and we are for each other. So I think that's been helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like, when I go home at night and I'm just chatting about my day with Mary, it's like those conversations are always extremely organic. Sometimes it's just not the right time to talk about work, but other times it's like, yeah, it feels right. And we'll start talking about something. And I mean, the wisdom she can provide just as an outsider, as a woman, as just my wife, like, I think it's really helpful.
Yeah.
Probably some of the best wisdom that I get is just from her as a sounding board. Outside of that, to be honest, I don't feel like I have really a core group of like work mentors. I've got people that I've got folks like you, Jeremy, that have been so good to me over the years that I don't feel like I can always reach out to and ask questions to. I don't know if there's like the guy. I think more of like a life mentors for me would be a few folks in my church, so a few of my pastors. As I was working through something just the other day, I was thinking, man, I really feel like I ought to just reach out to Todd or Kendall and just go grab coffee and connect. And maybe it's a one coffee sort of thing, or maybe over the next few months, I ask if we can meet bi-weekly and just like work through something I'm thinking about, But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, you got to be able to have people that are close to you, that know you, that can speak truth and love to you. And that you got to have both. You got to have the truth and the love. Otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah. Sometimes those mentors are just helping us keep balanced, right? They understand our origin or perhaps what's important to us, and directionally as well in terms of perhaps, success business and whatnot. But a lot of times it is how to balance oneself in terms of these decisions that we have to make, making sure that our core values are in sync and in line, and they ask the hard questions about, are you happy? Right. which is sometimes pretty difficult in our world. But where I'm real curious, because y'all's background wasn't necessarily in food. Could you explain a little bit how you got from early days to here, and why restaurant?
Yeah, I'll try not to be too tangential here, but I will back up sort of further than you're asking. I really had no clue what I wanted to quote unquote be when I grew up. I mean, just no clue. I went to a great school growing up and was well educated, went to UT, was a government major because I thought, well, first of all, I couldn't get into business school. I just didn't put in the work and wasn't smart enough. And so I chose government because my dad and his dad and his dad were all lawyers, Monteith and Monteith firms in Houston. They all just kind of worked for themselves and for each other for over 100 years. It's kind of a crazy legacy. So I thought, well, I guess maybe I'll just do that. But just had no clue. And then at some point, I think sophomore, junior year of college, realized I'm not going to be an attorney. That's not my path.
How did you know that?
Oh, I think it's just nothing about what I saw and what I was experiencing in my major or this internship I did my junior year of college felt like that was the right direction.
Yeah.
And so I basically out of college joined as an intern the ministry that I had been a part of in college called Campus Crusade for Christ. And so it had really impacted me. And so I was like, I'll join that. And what these mentors have been doing for me for a couple of years, I'll go do that in the place where I was, which was mainly in my fraternity house at UT. And so I did that for a couple of years, lived with a bunch of dudes who were doing the same thing. And it was a blast. It was some of the funnest like post-college days, like living with a bunch of guys that were good friends and we worked together. It was just a sweet time in our lives. And then went and got another sales job after that. And it was a software startup. I felt like sales was sort of the thing that just felt like I could probably do this and make some money. And like, I don't know, maybe this is what I need to be as a salesperson. But still just not a lot of clarity. And then at that sales job, I got to know a couple people who had been to a business school in Austin called Acton. So Acton it was an MBA focused on entrepreneurship and is a really unique program. It actually doesn't exist any longer, which is a bummer, but it was hugely impactful for me. Basically, the approach was, it is a 10-month program. Half of it was like core learning at home before you got to the classroom. So the first like semester, 5 months was just like 30 hours a week. You could maybe keep a job if you wanted to, learning the basics of business, finance, customers, and you'd read a bunch of articles and submit papers. And then the second half was sort of like a Navy SEAL approach. It was like 5 months of 100-hour weeks. You'd go in to a classroom, one big classroom, 20 to 25. We had 23 people in my class. And you would go to this thing, they called it the pit. And it was like in this amphitheater thing. And it was all case study based. So it was, I think we went through 100 case studies. Maybe it was, I can't remember the number, 200 case studies. And most of them were like Harvard Business School case studies of real companies. And they would, you would read these articles or these papers that could range from like a page or even like a couple sentences to like some of them were 45, 50 pages. And all of the essence of all of them is that they take you through a real life scenario in business that happened, and they would kind of leave you on the edge of a decision. And that decision would sometimes be financial or customers or operations. And you would have to come to class ready to like defend your point. Like you are in the shoes of that person. What are you going to do? And it was all, I don't think I heard a declarative statement from a teacher in 5 months. It was all like learn how to learn sort of thing and learn from your peers. And anyways, I'm giving you a long answer, but that was like training in entrepreneurship. Part of the deal was like learn the framework and archetypes of businesses and business decisions. Another part of that was like, here's what it might feel like to start a business, like 100-hour work weeks and like not really getting a lot of sleep and feeling like you're always failing. And I mean, you would literally, the idea was that you could not possibly prepare enough for the case. And so you would come in feeling unprepared, but you'd still have to perform and be ready to be called on. Sure. And it was just that, it was a terrible feeling. I hated it. But I think it sort of gave you those like knocks of potential entrepreneurship and just stepping into hard moments. And so I came out of that kind of wrecked, honestly, because I didn't know what I wanted to start, but I knew I wanted to start something.
But when you went into it, did you intentionally think that I want to start a business?
Yeah. So back to your question. So I knew I wanted to start something. I had no clue what.
Okay.
I just knew Acton seemed like a good place to go and learn the tools of entrepreneurship. The idea was like, we can teach you how to be an entrepreneur, which sort of goes against, I think people think you're like maybe born an entrepreneur. And their theory was that's not the case. You have to have a desire for it, but anyone can learn the basics of running a business. Anyways, came out, got another sales job because I had to pay the bills. And I was sort of tinkering with like coffee and beer. And so I had previously been in jobs of selling, in ministry. So like selling Christianity in a sense, selling software. And I had been in an oil and gas job. All those things you cannot taste and smell and see and touch and hand to a customer. And so I'm a pretty tactile person. I really wanted to create something that you could create, like that you could do with your hands. And so, winter of 2015, this was a year after I got out of Acton. My wife and I were in a hotel room in Dallas, just hanging out during the day, and she was scrolling on her phone, came across a Business Insider article randomly on Facebook or something. And it was about a healthy fast food spot in California. It was just an article about this place that was doing healthy fast food. And it was just like light bulbs for her in that moment. We were trying to think about what to start. We talked about it. By the end of the night, we were dead set on starting a restaurant. It was healthy, fast, casual. It was going to be a walkthrough style line because we love Chipotle, and it was going to be making grain bowls because that's what we made at home, which was basically just like, what vegetables do we have? What protein do we have? Make some rice, throw it all in a bowl, make some sauce. And so we had the concept within like 6 hours of her reading this article, and we were asking people at the wedding that night, what the name of the business should be. Kind of one of those things. And then it's been 6 months, the next 6 months, basically trying to talk ourselves out of starting a restaurant. And that was two things mainly. It was talking with as many restaurateurs as I could possibly find to try to just understand what I was about to get into. And then the other one was visiting. We were, married, no kids at the time, so had ultimate freedom. We went to New York and Tampa and Chicago and LA and went to places that did comparable concepts. Like, so it turns out this existed on the coasts, as things often do. So Sweet Green and Dig and this place called Fresh Kitchen, like they were doing similar things to what we were thinking. And so the beauty of restaurants is you can walk into them and see 95% of the operations right in front of your eyes and see if it's working. So we were able to prove the concept just by looking at it. And then I went and worked at Chipotle for a couple months just to learn the back of house and try to get some grasp of what I was doing. It was actually pretty funny. I ended up working at the Chipotle, which was about a block away from the business school that I went to just a year before. And there were this new class of entrepreneurs, of MBA students would come over to the Chipotle, and they recognized me and they would see me and they would do awesome. Triple takes trying to understand what I was doing. Is that really him? Did he go to school at our school last year? He's working at Chipotle. So anyways.
Did you have to lie on your resume a little bit to get that job?
I did not.
You didn't put...
I just didn't maybe boast all the things.
You didn't put your MBA on there? Yeah. What is this guy doing? That's awesome. That's a great story.
And that 6-month period where you were trying to talk yourself out of starting a restaurant, what were some of the biggest hurdles? And are those hurdles still with you today? Like, some of the fears that that stick with you, that you wake up at night and then you calm yourself thinking, okay, I think I got this, Was there anything that you were real timid about?
Particular fears.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest fear was just investing so much and then potentially losing it. Yeah. And maybe the main one being like the trust of my wife. It's like, I mean, you don't maybe get more than one shot at this, just with our age and the money we had. And it's like, I kept telling her along the way, I was like, hey, if you let me do this and it doesn't work, I promise I can go get another sales job and like make some money again. But there wasn't going to be like, go start another business after that. Yeah. It was a one shot thing. So I think there was just that pressure of, we got to get this right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are and getting it right is a difficult thing too, right? Because as you grow, each store is subtly different. Mm-hmm. What are the things that what are your priorities in terms of getting it right?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question exactly here, but something that's I think related that's in my mind is like, I think like nothing happens or is created overnight, but with consistency, a lot can be created in months, 6 months, a year, a decade. And so like, I think time is something that is like on your side, like using time and slowing down and being patient with decisions, I think is often a good idea. For instance, we were, that feeling you get when you have a business idea, like we did that first night, it was like, all we wanted to do was I just wanted to quit my job and I wanted to start it the next day. Like this was gold. This is it. But like the best thing that we did was say, okay, this might really be a great idea and be a ton of fun, but let's take 6 months. Let's like really think about this. Let's ask our friends. Let's just sleep on it. Like let time like permeate, give an opportunity for things to just like build up over time. And, I think that was crucial to the process of just like surfacing questions, answering those questions. Yeah. And now I think even now that the business has started, it's like you have these ideas of things you want to do, or even just projects. Often I feel so stuck in projects, like I'm not making any progress, but if you chip away at those things over time, like you're going to make massive progress.
Where does that discipline come from? Sorry to cut you off, but because that's very unusual for somebody that has an idea like that to wait 6 months. Like, where do you think that came from?
Oh man. I think some of it is, I'm going back to Mary a lot here, but I think some of it is just being grounded in a family. That's a real practical one, but like, it's like, I couldn't afford to make a quick decision and be wrong. So Acton used this term, narrowing the region of darkness. So you're never going to fully, in business and in life, you can't be certain about anything, but you can narrow that region of darkness to certain degrees to feel like you're as close as you can to like what's going to happen, to predicting the future, and predicting the outcome of something. And of course, you can spend way too long narrowing that region of darkness and not make a decision, of course. So it goes both ways. But I think in general, when you're creating something, when you're creating big things and you're making big decisions, you're going to start a business. We're going to, do some big initiative at Honest Mary's. It's like things that have massive impact. It's like narrowing that region of darkness, sitting on it, thinking on it, dwelling on it, like giving the ability to permeate is going to be beneficial. And I think the how is like just being grounded, I think, in things that are true and like things that you're committed to, like having a family, but like, I think my faith is important in this regard because like there are just core principles by which I'm going to live by. And so those are just predetermined things and principles that I think are helpful when it comes to like being slow and being patient and thinking kindly about things. I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if I'm answering it perfectly, but
no, it's great.
Yeah. And then some of it, I think, is just the discipline to slow down.
When you have that type of discipline and then you choose to add more and more and more, how do you know what's right? Like, how do you narrow the scope, and how do you know what enough is? And that could mean, from a day-to-day perspective, that could mean adding staff. That could mean adding stores. That could mean a lot. That could mean revenue. It could mean a lot. But how do you know? How do you have that scale, right?
Yeah, man.
To balance yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. I struggle with this a lot. I tend to overbook the calendar, and Mary pulls me back down and makes me cancel things. So I think it's good to have that balance. But I do get a lot of anxiety for just not having enough time to do all the things that I want to do. I think I'm in a particular season of my life where like I have to say no. I just have to say no to most things because I've got 3 main commitments in my life right now. It's my family, and it's like the time that's required with young kids, a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. It's like, okay, that just limits my days and my weeks so much right there. Mm-hmm. And so then the rest of my time, it's like I'm running a business, and then we're committed to our church. Yeah. And so it's like that looks like 2 or 3 activities a week and the relationships that come from that. Yeah. And it's like that's 99% of my time is accounted for right there. Yeah. And I think I've got to be willing to be okay with that and happy with that, and not feel like this sense of discontentment because I'm not doing more stuff. Like those are the things that I've chosen. And I would deem, if I step back and look at them, I'm like, those are the right things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like, I think having just the commitment to those things and trusting that those are I can't back out of any of them really. Yeah. And there's sort of like I think that's good. It's good to like be, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost just like limit the decision making each day. Sure. It's like, this is for this season of life is what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that I particularly learned what is enough. I think growing up, I was always one that pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and wanted bigger and bigger until maybe I couldn't handle bigger. Mm-hmm. And then I came back down to reality in a sense. And that was through life or business or athletics or just anything that I did. But I always try to evaluate, because my life is very similar, or our lives are very similar in terms of we have these grounding mechanisms that we create a sense of value and priority and prioritize in our life. And once one of those become imbalanced, and it may not be internal in a way as an individual, but once those become imbalanced, then I know it's enough, right? And it took me a long time to learn that. But how, knowing that the restaurant business is, maybe just answer this question, but I like to understand what levers that we pull to ground ourselves. But knowing that you've got a hectic day-to-day family and church that, essentially spread us all fairly thin, and then we lose sight of ourselves individually. What do you use to put, refuel yourself as an individual?
Yeah. I mean, I think it could be several things, but the main one is getting up, going to bed on time, and getting up before the kids. Yeah. I come back to it over and over and over again. It's the best way to make sure I'm ready to go for the day, is like having that 45 minutes to an hour before the kids wake up, where I can drink my coffee. Generally, I'm reading my Bible, or I'm praying, or I'm even just sitting there thinking, that I'm an introvert by nature as well. And so I just need for my tank to be filled up with like alone time. Because in the evenings, it's usually dedicated to being with Mary. And so it's like, that's my time to do that. I feel like that's just the one I come back to. Yeah. If I get nothing else throughout the day, I think that is enough usually. Mm. Yeah. I think another, so 2 habits, at the beginning of the year, like most people, I come up with a bunch of things that I want to change for the year. I know most of them won't stick, but the 2 from this year that I feel like I'm really trying to commit to, and they just have such big impact, are that first one of waking up at the right time and having that, and that just comes back to going to bed at the right time.
Right.
So I just set my watch to like, whatever it is, like 9:25. It's like, get up from what I'm doing, go to bed. Yeah. The other one though, that's been really impactful is when I get home from work, which is usually at 5. I try to stay committed to that. Get home at 5. The kids will usually rush me at the door, and I will turn my phone on airplane mode and go put it in my closet.
Yeah.
And just that single act of putting my phone away and out of sight has been so impactful to like my family time, which like, of course, when I get home, I want to be present with my family. But if that phone is on the counter and I can see it every time I walk by it, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to tap it. I'm going to see if there's anything there. And I'm just going to be thinking about that work. Did I get that email?
I know.
Like, whatever. It's just a world of things that are not my family. And so, I don't know, it's been a super simple, but like just immensely helpful thing to like be present with a huge priority of mine, which is just to be with the kids and hang out.
Be present.
Relieve my wife when I get home.
Yeah. Yeah. I am a roller coaster in that degree, and I'll go through phases, and then I'll get busy, or I'll just have a storm of events happening at work. And then I always want to be mindful when I'm at home, so I'm present. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I find myself doing that little check-in because I can't leave my mind. So,
man, if the phone is on my body or within my reach, I'm just gonna grab it. I don't have the self-control. I don't.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
You know what I love about that is that is counter to what culture talks about now in terms of entrepreneurship. You probably heard hustle culture. Mm-hmm. People are like, you got to work 100 hours a week. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to wake up at 3 a.m. And what you just described is a lot of discipline and honoring what's important to you, taking off at 5. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And by a lot of different metrics, you're very successful. And you're able to do that with being, honest and authentic and dedicated to things that matter to you. Mm-hmm. Whereas, what you hear on social media, and at least, I don't know, the algorithms on my stuff are like, you got to wake up at 3 a.m., you got to work till 10 p.m., you got to go. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. Cause that's, the one thing I've always struggled with is, at different events with my kids or when I'm with my wife, I've got the phone and I always say, well, I'm going to try by 8 o'clock to put that down. And, but the reality is it bleeds in later than that, and I start to justify it because of like, I love what I do, I love what I do, and I'm building something here that's going to, eventually, benefit my family greater and greater and leave legacy and all that. But the fact is, because I'm further down the road than you are with kids, is like, yeah, man, I could have spent more time with them. I should have probably spent more time with them. And again, you're a great example of how you're doing that now in the moment, and you're still very successful. So that's amazing. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Appreciate it.
In our world that we live in now, talking about leadership and top down, in terms of how to generate that culture, I think it's also important as a vet, because my kids see me, right? And we'll tease each other. My 14-year-old daughter, Ruby, she's got a cell phone, and she's just always wanting to be on it. Mm-hmm. Our son, he's 10. He does not yet, of course, but at any rate, we know what present is, although sometimes we're not present, but we'll tease each other in terms of, hey, you got to put that down. So I think, having that discipline early is real nice because of the culture that we live in, because they're going to learn from you, and they're going to learn from us, and they're going to understand what priorities are.
Yeah.
They'll make their own priorities in terms of their own life, but that will always follow them, right? That grounding and what's important. So
for sure.
What do you want the story of Honest Marriage to be 5-10 years from now? Like, what, if you can fast forward and see yourself, what do you want that story to be?
Yeah, man, I love that question. That's a tough one. I think one of them is just what I said. Like, I think what you just hit on, this idea of like being able to create something great with also having limitations in your life, like doing other priorities. I think it's something that I want to be able to communicate to future entrepreneurs, or even just demonstrate to people around me, or even prove to myself, like a great business can be created, a scaled business can be created with a 9 to 5 work day. Of course, like seasons of being up way too late and like of course, but like generally you can set those boundaries and still create something great without it overflowing into other things. So I think that is something. I mean, the purpose of Honest Mary's stands true continually, which is we want to positively impact countless lives through life-giving fast food. Mm-hmm. And so the idea there is that anyone that would come into contact with Honest Mary's, starting with our team, leaves Honest Mary's that day or in 5 years better than when they got there. And I think that gets at the core of why we started Honest Mary's, which was and why the fast food, the healthy fast food thing rang so just true and excited us, was because fast food historically takes life from people. Yeah. It's a little maybe dramatic, but like the product and the place and the people are generally going to like deplete you at a typical fast food restaurant. And so we wanted to create a version of that actually like gave life to people, the product, the place, and the people. And so, I think that's a big one, is that I would love for people who worked at Honest Mary's to say that was the best job I ever had, because I felt, not necessarily because I got paid the most and because but because like I felt cared for. It was a place where I went to work and I felt like the people around me genuinely cared for me. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that if we can create that, and that can be done at scale, we can create the kind of culture where that's even done when I and the people on our leadership team aren't in the building. I think you've created something really beautiful, because at the end of the day, it all comes back to people. It really does. It's if you're not helping people in some way grow or become better, it's like, what are we all doing here? And of course, like, profit's important, and I like money, but it's like profit is ultimately just a means to get something else. And in this case, it's like, profit is helps you build the business so that you can continue doing the thing that's helping people get better, Yeah. So I think it would be in 10, 15, 20 years, we could look back at Honest Mary's and say that a lot of people, countless people were impacted in a positive way because it existed, and that it had that enduring impact on people, and people were changed for the better and went on from Honest Mary's to do great things. And in some part, that was because of the nurturing that they got when they were, with us. Yeah. That's great, man. Yeah. That's really good.
I'm curious, in all your research, and I'm sure you continue to look in the world around you in terms of the environment. What percentage, or I guess my question is real pointed in terms of the level of understanding about what you just said as it relates to the general industry, right? Because it seems like when you have those core values in terms of what your give back is or what you're trying to do, it seems like you would rise to the top fairly quickly, and having and having that message in a way that not only you receive whenever you come into your restaurant, but delivering that message in a way that is that expands beyond you. Mm-hmm. That's real interesting, because it is different. It is subtly different. You're not trying to overpower, and that subtlety is real fascinating, because it essentially has its own legs as in this experiential perspective. Mm-hmm. It's probably not a question or a thing, but it's this hospitality, treatment of others, treatment of how you're treating others because you want to also be treated in that way. Methodology that I feel is so heavy that our world is missing. Mm-hmm. Right. And,
Yeah, it makes me think of another phrase that I took from Acton, and I think it's from an article that's not from Acton, maybe Harvard or so, I don't know who wrote it, but the idea of long-term profits
Mm-hmm.
when you're thinking about business.
Right.
And this translates not just to the way you treat people, but just the way you make decisions. I actually remember the Hop Dotty hangout with you and Farrell, and y'all talked about how like at Torchy's, we do things the right way.
Yeah.
And that phrase has stuck with me. It's a simple thing to say, and I've heard it before, but for whatever reason, it stuck with me in that conversation. But doing things the right way is ultimately going to pay itself back at some point. And the payback is really not even what you should be looking for. It's like you don't treat people well just so that one day they might tell their friend to come work at Honest Mary's.
Yeah, right.
You treat people well because that's the right thing to do.
The right thing to do.
But ultimately, there will be fruit from that.
Yeah.
And you may not even see the fruit, and but there will be fruit from that. I think it's trusting the things we know are the right things to do, which generally are about treating people the right way. Do those things, and like you're going to be successful. And people will be changed for the good. It's like it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
it's an interesting shift. I'm listening to this book over again called Infinite Games by Simon Sinek. Have you read that?
I have
one?
not read it.
Yeah, they talk about finite and infinite games. And there's some games that are finite, right? There's dedicated players and dedicated rules, and there's going to be a winner at the end of it. And then an infinite game is something that the goal is to just keep playing, right? So there's different players that come in and out. There's different rules that present themselves. And he said a lot of people make mistakes by looking at business as a finite game that you're trying to win, right? You're trying to get to a certain point and make the most profit, when really business is an infinite game that can be played forever, but a lot of times decisions need to be made with a longer term basis, kind of back to your point of being patient, right? And saying, okay, well, I'm going to make these decisions, maybe not for today, but I'm going to make a decision today because of what I want 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And those kind of decisions end up falling into the category of like, well, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to not cut a corner. I'm going to treat this person right. Even if I'm giving them a second or third chance, but I'm going to believe in them because I want this to be a long-term opportunity for them. That kind of stuff definitely adds up to success. And there's examples of that. If you look in a lot of different industries, the people that really did what they say they were going to do in terms of honoring people and honoring, their values tend to be really successful, but it's unique. Southwest Airlines, I think, is a good example of like they took care of people, right? They hired people that would take care of people, and they are a low cost provider. But I would love to fly Southwest every chance I got because of the experience that you get. Like the person that gets up and reads you all the different roles. Sometimes they sing it, they joke around, and it's like I always think, why don't more people do that? That doesn't seem that hard to execute on, but maybe it is long-term and consistent and day in and day out, and I think that's the discipline, right? Is doing the right thing, and treating people right every day.
Yeah.
And then that consistency will add up to something pretty amazing, in the long term.
Yeah. And what you're saying about like, what is the purpose of business as the entrepreneur, as the business owner? It's so easy to get caught up in like, where are we taking this thing, and ultimately what's the payout going to be? Even if that payout is in your mind about people, I think sometimes we're so tempted to always look at what we're creating or what will happen in the future, that we forget like the current means in which we're doing things. And like what is life if you're not just doing the things you're preaching right now? And so I think a lot of it comes back to the core values and the way you're treating people. And there's this phrase that one of my pastors likes to use: "You'll never be who you're not becoming." So it's like we want things to be a certain way someday, but like at the end of the day, it's like the person you are right now is the person that you're becoming. And so I think that speaks to just like the small decisions, the way you treat people, like, you're and again, you're going to end up building something great with it.
Yeah. Well, we've reached our hour. Believe it or not,
that was fast.
Yeah, that was extremely fast. Thank you.
Yeah,
this was really good.
Appreciate it.
Interesting, good questions. Just creating an environment.
This was great, man. This is really good. I really enjoyed this one. Thank you.
Well, we always call this our therapy.
Yeah.
Whether it's between us or we have, a guest, it's gratifying, even though we have similar issues as business owners. It's gratifying to hear other perspectives and other subtle ways to handle, one's balance or one's business or one's treatment of others. And so I appreciate your good thoughts.
Yeah, it's not often too. You can just take an hour and just kind of dig below those daily questions. Dig a couple levels deeper, peel back the onion just a little bit. So,
well, we all have our spiels of how we sell what we do and our stories that almost, in a way, even though we don't like to think so, they become rehearsed. Mm-hmm. And this environment is a way to peel back those layers and understand, well, let's get beyond the rehearse version and let's dig in a little bit more, wherever that leads it to the organic conversation. So appreciate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Very good.